right now. I do want to remind everybody that our Anchorage, excuse me, is part of the traditional homeland of the Eklutna Dena'ina, and Alaska Trails recognizes the stewardship of the Dena'ina on whose land we live, work, and recreate. And I am going to do a brief thank you right now to our sponsors. We've had some very consistent and helpful sponsors that have been with us for many years. So I'll take a moment to thank them, including ConocoPhillips, Alaska Pipeline Service Company, Bureau of Land Management, and the Alaska Recreation and Park Association. We're grateful for their support each year, and enables us to offer this conference for free. Thanks to those of you who donated to Alaska Trails via the conference website. There's other ways to support us, including joining our volunteer events, which will be kicking off with a volunteer crew leader training in May, excuse me, and then events starting on National Trails Day in June. And so today's schedule is something you don't really need to know because you're here for the last one, but welcome. We're very, excuse me, excited to have you here with us today. Nick, do you want to go ahead and share your screen and get the presentation going, and I'll introduce you and then each speaker in turn.
Great, Steve, we'll go ahead and do that.
So Nick Farline with the city of Valdez is the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services Director in Valdez. He earned his BA in economics from Eastern Washington University and an MS in recreation and sport pedagogy from Ohio University. He has over 20 years of experience in the recreational field and is currently president-elect of the Alaska Recreation and Parks Association. He holds a National Recreation and Parks Association Certified Park and Recreation Executive Certification. He has directed outdoor recreation programs internationally, as well as for multiple municipal and state agencies, has presented at the NRPA and ARPA conference several years, as well at the North American Environmental Education Conference in 2021 and the Alaska Municipal League in 2021 as well. Welcome, Nick, and thank you for putting such a great panel together.
No, Steve, I really appreciate that. So we also have Holly Spock Torres from Huddle. And we have Gabe Travis and Christine Bly from Interior Trails, and Dr. Hunter Holland with Parks and People. So that'll be our panel for today. We're really excited to share with you all that this first slide, a success story development of Mealsville Park. And some of you may ask yourself, well, how is it a success story if we haven't actually built any trails yet? Well, once we build the trails, it's going to be a grand success because this process has been years in the making, and being able to work with a variety of different agencies, both here in the state, private landholders, and to be able to secure this incredible piece of property that you're seeing right there on your screen, that's Meals Hill, to be able to secure that for the community and visitors of Valdez to recreate is, I think, is an success in and of itself. So we're excited to share how that process went. So we'll be a panel session format. We're going to kind of bounce back and forth between the four of us or five of us and kind of each take different parts of it. We'll talk a little bit about the overview of the project as a whole, and then we'll get into some next steps, and then we'll turn it over to some Q&A. So as Steve already mentioned, he kind of went through, I think, a pretty extensive bio for me. So I'm very flattered that you read that. Thank you. Let's go ahead and Holly, you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your role within this project?
Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Spoth Torres. I founded Huddle AK about 7 years ago now, and we do primarily public involvement, stakeholder engagement, and landscape architecture. We have 2 licensed landscape architects at Huddle, myself and Bree Kiefer, who was the primary designer on this project. Parks and trail projects are our favorite, so we were really thrilled to be part of this team. I guess I'll go to Hunter next.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Holly. My name is Hunter Holland. I am the owner of the Parks and People Research Lab, and we focus on using tourism and recreation opportunities as a way of advancing community health. And so specifically in this project, our scope of work was engaged with public engagement. So we were heavily involved on the front end and then used public input to guide the development of a master plan. Thank you. I'll pass it off to Interior Trails.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. I am Christine Bile, and this is.
I'm Gabe Travis.
We know many of you from various projects over the last 12 or so years that we've been in business. Gabe and I both came out of trail crews for the federal agencies, Park Service and National Forest, and started in the private sector in 2008.
9.
Something like that. We focus on trail design and construction in all stages. So from the very earliest master plan brainstorming to the final, perfecting of trail tread. We really love it all, and it's been a pleasure to be involved with this collaborative project in a really cool parcel in Valdez.
Awesome, thanks. Another part of the component team was ECI. And so we brought them, Holly brought them on as a sub-consultant, and she'll talk a little bit more about their role once we get into a little deeper in the plan of the actual park. So as you can see on the left is a map of the downtown kind of corridor of Valdez. And again, what's really unique about this Meals Hill property is that it really is there in the heart of Valdez. So if we all remember in 1960 earthquake, was kind of this old town area, and they had to move the town. And this is the majority of where the town was moved to, and just kind of built up around Meals Hill. And in any case, for most people that live in Valdez, it's within walking from where they work, where they live. And that is of a particular significant interest for us in that. And Hunter will get into more what that meant as people relate to the hill. But the fact that it is so close in the heart of Valdez is really unique for this park. The other thing is that we have our cruise ships come right there on the kind of where that white kind of squiggly line is by the water. And so it also allows itself, any cruise ship passengers that arrive, very easy that they can access the park. So some of the site history, initially there was native populations here in this Valdez area long before any of us were looking for gold and whatnot. So we've certainly been very interested in that kind of historic significance of Meals Hill on the native populations. And that's been really fascinating to be able to appreciate some of that. And as we talk about some next steps, there's a Founders Memorial Art Project that is going to be going on Meals Hill on the entryway that is giving recognition to those native peoples. Valdez was founded by George Cheever Hazlett and Andrew Jackson Meals, and they founded it to use it as a jumping off point to go gold mining up into the Chugach Mountains. And so the actual property was owned by the Port of Valdez Company. And the Port of Valdez Company, the great grandson of Hazlett, is who the city of Valdez worked with to acquire the land. Over the last 20 years or so, there's a lot of different proposals for what Meals Hill could be. And that was anything from building a museum on top of Meals Hill to putting up a hotel with kind of some high-end homes. And ultimately, Meals Hill it sits on a bedrock. And so none of those ideas really pan themselves out. So as the Port of Valdez company was starting to get rid of some of their property here in Valdez, they ended up connecting with the Great Land Trust, and Great Land Trust had identified this parcel of land. It scored very highly as far as their a piece of land that could be conserved. And so we worked with, when I say we, the city of Valdez worked with Great Land Trust, Port of Valdez company, and ended up acquiring the property. And with us acquiring the property came this conservation easement. And that's really where a lot of what we're talking about today is that land has been set aside. It can't be, you're not going to be able to build any houses on it. Those conservation easements are very restrictive in the use. And so what was really fascinating, and I give a ton of credit to Interior Trails and Holly and certainly Dr. Holland, helping us develop and work this plan around acknowledging this conservation easement. And then at the same time, taking the community's expectations of what is possible on this hill, because we knew that when people started thinking kind of pie in the sky, I mean, could we have a gondola that went up? Are we going to do another little ski hill down there? Like what are some of these major things that some people are thinking could be a good use of the property? And so make sure you can use that conservation easement, because that's how the city was able to acquire the land. Working within that really allowed us to set this framework of expectations. And so we worked extensively, very, very closely with Great Land Trust as we developed this plan to make sure that all of the trails and amenities that were on the hill both fit the conservation easement, but also were in the spirit of making sure and keeping this property, very natural and very beautiful. And again, Dr. Holland's going to get into that. Is, people when they thought about Meals Hill, they associated with this the sense of beauty and this isolation in times. They wanted to make sure that still this very natural area. And so those were all really critical as we were building this park. And so I'm sure as many of you have dealt with and can understand that there's that balance, right? I mean, how are we going to be able to allow access and make sure that everybody in the community will be able to come in and enjoy and be a part of this incredible park, but at the same time, making sure that we really honor the natural beauty of it and work within this conservation easement. So Holly, I'm going to toss it over to you as we acquired it, and now we have to figure out what are we going to do with this. Now we have the CODs has this 186 beautiful acre parcel of land, and now what?
Okay, so I'm just going to talk for a few minutes here about the process. You can see with the text underneath, there's a lot of things that happened between August of 2020 and June of 2021 when the plan was adopted by the city council. So in order for everyone to kind of be on the same page about what we were actually doing, we broke it up into 5 different stages: listen and learn, envision, share, approve, and permitting and construction. So listen and learn and envision were a big bulk of the work. There was tons of not only existing conditions and site analysis that happened during listen and learn, but there was also a ton of stakeholder engagement, both through a community and visitor industry survey, which Hunter's going to talk to you more about, but also with a committee. We had a Meals Hill Planning Committee where people applied to participate on this committee. So there was a Meals Hill Planning Committee in addition to work with the general public. The bulk of this work happened during the time where we were all in our own homes in lockdown. Still, though, we were able to do all of these outreach events in a hybrid atmosphere. So if we were online, we also provided an in-person safe opportunity. So we were lucky with this project to be able to work with people in person as well. So during listen and learn, that's exactly it. Existing site conditions, analysis, and lots of listening from stakeholders all over Valdez, and learning about people's opinions and feelings about the site. We then took all that information and started envisioning what the site could be. Again, with all the same people, both as a project team internally, we started analyzing what we learned, but then we took that back to the community and developed a range of alternatives with the community as well. Once we had what we thought was a preferred alternative, I guess we'd say, we shared that with the community. They didn't like it that much. So we popped back into Envision. And we reworked it a little bit, and then we worked. So the primary issue was parking, and we'll talk about that later. But so the way we had the project structured allowed us to pop back and forth between Share and Envision one time as we needed to get it just right for the Valdez community. Once we did, we moved over into Approve. We went to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the City of Valdez approved it in June of 2021. We are currently in the fundraising phase. So I guess just to wrap up this discussion, it's just important to remember that you have to set up a process that not only the project team understands, but that the community can follow along in an understandable way with you, and that you have to be flexible in order to bounce back and forth between different phases, because sometimes you just don't get it quite right the first time, and that's okay. Because you'll get it right eventually if you continue to listen. So that's what we did. Okay.
Yeah.
I
Thank you,
think
Holly. That was great. And I think the one thing that you had mentioned in that we just, and of course, Dr. Holland's going to go into more, but there's a lot of emotion and that was surrounded with this, because for people that had lived in Valdez for a number of years, they had been up recreating on Meals Hill all their life. And so now there's this opportunity to do something with it. And so that definitely elicited emotions. And there's certainly kind of this ownership that a lot of the locals had. So I'm going to toss it over to Dr. Holland, and he'll talk a little bit about how do we create this vision? How did we give the community a voice? And then what did we do with it? How did that actually translate into an actual plan with trails?
Hey, thanks, Nick. And thank you, Holly, as well, for the introduction. I completely agree with what Holly prefaced me with there, stating that, the data that I'll be sharing with you today is a small piece of that engagement phase, the listen and learn. And so I would be eager to follow up this conversation with anyone who's interested in learning more about the pieces that perhaps we're not talking about. What I am going to share with you, though, is our community stakeholder data that came from a survey, both in electronic and hard form, as well as interviews that we conducted in what we call a snowball format, referring to we tried to stay really engaged in the community. Once we spoke with a key group or a key individual, we asked them then to guide us to other more diverse individuals to make sure that we captured those voices throughout the community and the surrounding areas. In total, we are working with, in this data set, 428 completed surveys that were very comprehensive. We were extremely intentional in their design, and again, I'd love to discuss that with you further. 352 of those are from community stakeholders, so individuals with varying degree of being rooted in Valdez, durations of residency in that area. Thank you, Nick. If you'll please go to the next slide. So when we jumped into the design of this data collection in the listen and learn phase, we wanted to focus on 5 guiding themes. And let me quickly share those with you because they will be used as headings in each of these slides. So the first one is the degree of support regarding developing Mills Hill as a public communication recreation area or a public recreation area. The second is what forms of significance do people feel they hold with the property? Are there any bonds they have between the individuals and the natural environment? The third is desires and the uses for the area. The fourth is any preferences in the development for both individuals, community stakeholders, and visitors. And then the last was, what do forms of short and more long-term successful development look like? So we wanted to make sure and capture those in diverse perspectives. Our data showed that community stakeholders strongly supported additional development for non-motorized recreational use and opportunities on this area. Very few respondents, 9%, did not want any form of development at all with the location. Thank you, Nick. Regarding what significance do people feel the property holds for them as individuals as well as the city, there was a strong voice stated that it was accessible nature-based recreation opportunity within proximity of the town. And I think Nick really prefaced us for this earlier on, stating that, you know, community members, they enjoy the ability to escape for a lunch break and enter the wilderness, enter a natural environment, gain elevation in town, and be able, you know, to see a glacier, see the overview of the city, see some wildlife, etc. They additionally saw it as the potential to support the unique Valdez identity. There's a novel culture associated with Valdez that is celebrated, and that wanted to be supported in the development as opposed to using the property to change that culture. Nick, if you'd please click, thank you. Here are some additional themes that showed up regarding the significance held between the relationship of community stakeholders and the property of interest. I will not read each of these in great detail. However, these are the forms of significance that showed up the most frequently within our sample. Thank you, Nick. Regarding desired uses for Mills Hill as a community recreation area, we took all the desired uses and we placed them within categories, right? Because we wanted to go in this with a without assumptions, without bias in the data collection. And so in order to do that, we opened it up to qualitative information collected from community stakeholders, both in a survey as well as in one-on-one conversations. And then we're able to place those in groups so that we had a map to guide us in collecting more information and understanding what the desires were. There was a strong desire for community access, and that desire trumped or was a priority over things such as economic gain or tourist access. Now, we jumped into this even further and we wanted to understand, what do you mean by community access? This was measured on a 5-point scale. And so you can see the closer to 5, the greater the desire was indicated by community stakeholders. Nick, would you please, thank you. Now, what are these desired uses for the community members? Well, regarding recreational areas, they view the property as an ideal hiking spot. They want to use it for nature viewing, snowshoeing, wildlife viewing, mountain biking, among other opportunities. And I'll take it a step further and say that, you know, regarding the bonds, the relationships that people have formed with the property in the past, Nick and Holly both mentioned that, you know, community stakeholders were really engaged in this, and they were eager to speak up regarding the development of this property. There were a lot of examples of what we would call place dependence, referring to people held a bond with Mills Hill because they were dependent upon it to ride their bicycle, or they were dependent upon it to gain a scenic view of the city. Fewer forms of desired uses showed up in what we'd refer to as place identity, referring to that they hold a bond with the environment because they have a personal identity associated with it. And in some ways that makes sense, right? Because the property previously to being handed over to the community was not public land, even though it was being used. And so the data is already starting to tell us here that there's the potential to form place identities with people gaining access to this property, right? Creating an intimate environment that creates a sense of place and an attachment, responsibility in protecting that area. Thank you, Nick. All right, the third guiding theme, I believe, is preferences for the development. Opportunities to freely explore the property was strongly indicated. You know, conservation is very important in protecting that natural environment. And so community stakeholders were clear about how best to do that, both in the short and long term. They also wanted to feel as though, even though there's a trail, they still had the opportunity to freely explore the environment, right? And feel as though they could experience solitude in that environment. They wanted to avoid overcrowding, have connectivity to the existing trail systems, as well as other forms of infrastructure in the city, as well as have accessible opportunities. And that includes accessible opportunities for both taking their children onto Mills Hill property, as well as those with varying physical ability. Thank you, Nick. So further, preferences for the development, specific park elements that were identified as being important And how this was measured, what would you need to see as a user of this area in order to feel that immediately there was success in its development, right? And so things that we saw were the management that ensured that there was not trash left overnight on the property. There was interpretive materials such as educational resources that informed them about what recreational opportunities were available, the length of those opportunities, what the desired uses for each area were, et cetera. Allowing pets to access the property, as well as places to rest. Thank you, Nick. We can continue through this one. I feel like we've already covered it. Thank you, Nick. So we also asked community stakeholders what concerns they had for the development of Mills Hill, and a range of concerns were listed, right? So we categorized these into groups. I'm showing you the ones that were most frequently indicated. Sustainability was the #1 concern. So sustainability in the short as well as long term, being able to manage it with human resources, as well as the budget provided by the city on the property. Ecological concerns were another. Degradation that might happen to the environment in Mills Hill, especially with an increased interest in accessing that property in the future. Thank you, Nick. Here are some examples of concerns that showed up within each category. You know, I'm currently covering information that was gathered by community stakeholders, right? So residents of the community as well as the surrounding areas. However, we also did collect information from both past visitors to Valdez, as well as visitors who intend to come in the future and have expressed that interest. And I'm excited to say that the vision that we received in the listen and learn phase was a shared vision. The themes that were captured within the guiding thematic areas that we were interested in studying, they shared similar interests. And so what were those things? They were environmentally conscious planning and management, connectivity to existing opportunities in town, such as an experience on Mills Hill trails might then lead a visitor to the museum, to the visitors bureau, et cetera. Opportunities to experience a near natural setting, so improvements to the area, but not extensive developments. Inclusion of interpretive material, easy to moderate difficulty recreation opportunities, and then additionally consideration and accessibility of emergency response, understanding that the terrain can be difficult and it also can be dangerous. You're walking close to the water. You know, there's lots of rock exposure. There's also access to human wildlife interactions, and just making sure that we're being responsible in the development phases in case of a need for response. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, so just to kind of transition between Hunter and interior trails, I would like to say that in my experience, it's really rare that a project has enough resources to invest in the level of quantitative analysis that we were able to invest in with Parks and People. And that investment really did pay dividends in the long run. Like I said, I know it's not feasible for every project out there, but we were able to really match what we think we were hearing in a quantitative, just hearing from the public, right, with what Hunter was crunching with the data. So it really did help us strengthen not only the vision and values of the plan, but it also helped us communicate why we were able to do certain elements of the plan. So I'd like to pass it to Gabe and Christine right now to talk through kind of the concept for how the trails started working and evolving, and what you see. There's a lot going on the site, but also everything is consistent with the conservation easement. We always need to remember that. So I'll pass it to you, Gabe and Christine. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, thanks, Holly. Can you hear us?
Can you see us? I'm not seeing.
Okay.
Okay, great.
You know, I like Holly was saying, one of the things that was really somewhat rare and fun for us was we had a real sense of purpose for our design based on the community feedback. So the hill itself, except for a little bit of existing infrastructure, was kind of a blank canvas, but we had a real sense of mission based on the priorities that the community had expressed in meetings and through the research that Dr. Holland did. So this was a really satisfying experience to feel like we were getting to design trails and working with Bree and Holly on the landscape architecture end of things to really build a network of trails and experiences that were what the community wanted. So that was a really satisfying part of this project for us.
Gabe's going to talk a little bit about the exact process we went through on the ground to make it a little bit more clear what it means to come into this type of project as a trail designer. But one other thing I wanted to add was Hunter and Nick both alluded to this a little bit with the sense of Valdez's identity as a city. A lot of people in Alaska, especially, but even outside travelers coming in, think of Valdez often as a pretty extreme recreational destination. Heli skiing is world class. The mountains in that part of the Chugach are really steep. Ocean and kayaking travel is, needs a level of commitment and expertise. There's a lot of identity in Valdez built around being an extreme destination. And then there's also the tourism traffic that comes on a boat that often isn't very physically, doesn't have a lot of physical access to the Valdez as a natural environment. So between those two poles, we really saw the community wanting and us envisioning that Meals Hill could be a gateway experience for the people who are not able to drop into the backcountry or, ski a couloir, but they could start developing the skills and the comfort levels and the experiences that would help them build toward more confident and safe ventures further afield. So that was a really kind of unique niche to meet with a trail design, I think, so overtly stated that we were looking at this as a stepping stone in what Valdez already offered. And that was very helpful to have that to continue to clarify as we would have different options come up.
And so we basically began our work in this first phase that Holly mentioned, which was listen and learn. Part of that included our participation in like a current condition assessment of the conditions, what was out there now, what extent were existing social trails traversing the property, animal use patterns, any protected species or those types of things. So basically we were doing our usual cataloging of control points where we knew we needed to avoid places we needed to avoid or places we needed to make sure to go, property boundaries. And then we were also looking at the terrain level for wetlands or critical habitat or places that would be really perfect for single-use trails, like for instance mountain biking. And then we kind of worked some of that up at a map level in collaboration with Holly and Bree and the rest of the design team. So it was very, collaborative, looking at what we were finding and kind of what we were hearing from the community, always kind of, going back and forth, revisiting the priorities and the things that the community wanted. And then, of course, Christine and I, one of the things we bring to the project that's unique on design teams is that we would go out then and stomp around and bushwhack and crash through the alders and actually look and see, like, is what we think on the map, what we think we're seeing, is it actually what is out there? And so we did our whole kind of ground truthing phase to really be sure that when the design was and the master plan was finalized, that we were providing the city of Valdez with something that was truly usable, not just kind of an abstract line on a map that wouldn't be a feasible thing to actually build.
And not just usable, Gabe, let me jump in, but
Yeah.
also attractive in the sense that you can look at something from, the topographical lines on a map and say, this is buildable terrain, but it's only when you get out there and you stand in a certain spot and think, oh man, if we tipped the aspect just a bit for the last, approach or whatever, we'd have these views instead of these views. We'd protect the really impacted view of the fuel tanks and we'd get to look more into an old growth grove. All of that kind of stuff that provides for real connectivity to a specific site that you just can't get from map level alone, no matter how great the data continues to get.
Yeah, and then so one of the really rich parts of the experience for us, and I think one of the reasons that we as a team came up with a product we're so proud of, is that we had such a collaborative process. All of the different members of the team and then members of the planning committee, people who live in Valdez, all got to see and provide feedback and thoughts and stuff, at many different points along the way. So we could just, get it as a sort of a design in mind, and then get feedback, and then revise, and then get feedback and revise, and then present stuff to the community, get more feedback, revise again. And so it was very, we really got to hone in on what was going to work well and meet a lot of the needs that were clearly expressed in the survey that Dr. Holland produced.
Gabe, if I could jump in real quick, and I think it's such a critical component because due to the conservation easement, there's no motorized usage on the property, but you have different user groups, obviously with mountain bikers and cross-country skiers and hikers, dog walkers, and we all have that in all our communities. And the ability for the team to listen to each one of those unique groups and provide each one of them with something that is one of our people on our steering committee had said, is that it produces a high stoke level, right? A high stoke factor. They're really excited about it. And I think that was one of the things that was both a challenge and an opportunity, is how are we going to give each voice in the community and each one of these user groups an equal opportunity to give feedback and evaluate that feedback. And oftentimes we all know that sometimes it's the vocal minority that kind of drives the narrative or drives the request of the trails. And I think Dr. Holland and certainly Interior Trails did a fantastic job of saying, well, there's also this kind of silent minority that we need to be able to give to really give some credence to. And so I think that was an interesting piece as you're looking at this trail composition and the map. There's a little bit of something for everyone, which is really really powerful. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that's great to include that perspective, Nick. And I think for us, we were really trying to keep in mind that we wanted many uses. We wanted people to have opportunities for wildlife viewing, more of a solitary experience, pedestrian based. We also, there was clearly an interest in mountain bike trails, beginner to intermediate level mountain biking, single track experiences, a need for multi-use trails, additionally grooming and cross-country skiing and snowshoeing. So there was a lot to balance and consider and try to figure out kind of how do we get a little bit of all of these things on this one parcel. And we started with developing zones, because another one I didn't just say, but the conservation and easement itself specified we needed to have areas that were totally undeveloped. And so we identified areas that would be really well suited for those types of purposes too, just protecting critical wildlife habitat and providing kind of a undisturbed areas for just conservation. So we started to slowly hone in on the zones that would be appropriate for each use or for multi-use experiences. And it's slowly things started to fall into place. So it was a really satisfying design experience with that back and forth and a sense of multiple missions and multiple priorities that we were kind of always balancing and juggling.
Thank you, Interior Trails. Nick, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the thing that made everybody mad and then how they're happy now. Okay, so, and I think that this is an important conversation to have just as professionals, outdoor recreation professionals too. So Meals Hill, it's a hill, right? this curved entry that you see at the furthest right, the existing grade of the existing road that goes up the hill was about 18%. That's too steep for a lot of people. That's too steep for a lot of people to access. And what happens at the very beginning then is that somebody who maybe has a little bit of a limited mobility issue can't access the whole rest of the site. So at the outset, the team tried, and universal access was a theme that we heard from the survey and from the community, and how to provide the most people with the most access. So the way we first dealt with that was we had parking a little bit further into the site, because we're dealing with, are we regrading the road or are we bringing cars onto the site, right? And so at first the design team decided to save some money, not regrade the road, and bring cars onto the site. Well, we heard pretty loud and clear that the community did not like that. So we went back to the drawing table. Christine and Gabe and Bree and Brian from ECI figured out a way to creatively and in a fun way deal with the grade and keep cars off the site. So cars are now using the existing infrastructure around the convention center, around the harbor, all those places, and the entrance area will be regraded to provide universal access to the site. In addition, that brownish line around the south there's a cantilevered boardwalk on the outside of the cliff, so that there will also be a fun loop experience, and maybe even like a fun destination experience for people who are coming from all over Alaska or even from somewhere else in the United States. So I think in projects, it's important to have community conversations about what your public facilities are designed to do in order to allow a range of experiences for all people, right? And if the community has identified accessibility and low barriers as a priority, then you need to make sure that you're doing that with your design. So I think it was an important community conversation to have. It was difficult, but I think the results of having that conversation were good in the long run, because now the city of Valdez is going to have a park that is accessible to a lot of people, but also maintainable and sustainable for them to be able to maintain the whole site. So I guess I'll stop there. I'll give it back to Nick for anything you might want to wrap up with before we go to questions.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. And I appreciate getting, the perspective on the map, but this was certainly, as Holly had mentioned, this was the most challenging aspect of the plan. And it was challenging both for the community, it was challenging for council, and it was challenging for us as a team to really wrap our heads around and be able to come up with this solution. As I'd mentioned before, we deal with it with a lot of our natural trails and spaces. How do we allow people to access it, but at the same time, keep it natural and beautiful? And so this was one that we really put some time and intentionality into. And I think, as Holly had mentioned, the first couple of iterations of this, we heard loud and clear, didn't go very well. And so, but it's also the most expensive part of the master plan. So that in and of itself was also, we needed to put a lot of consideration into, because as we look at the master plan, often what was asked was, and I'm going to go back because I just talked. So what are you going to do first? That was the consistent, well, if we only have X amount of money, what are you going to do first? And so oftentimes we would come back to, well, it seems to us that if we did nothing else except allow other portions of the population that have some ambulatory issues to access this incredible property, that'd be a win. And that was, well, I think that resonated with a lot of the community. There was some that also thought, people are already using it as it is right now, so let's do something the community really has a high, I'll use that again, a high stoke factor, right? Let's put in the trails first, let's put in the biking trails first. And so we while we put a dollar amount to each and every one of these different trails, we're pretty intentional about not necessarily creating a priority list while we're bringing this forward to get council approval of the project. And so that did allow us to do a couple things. It allowed us to get council support and say, yes, this plan looks great. We like it. Then what we did is we ended up coming back with a kind of a funding strategy implementation plan. And so, excuse me. And during that time, what we did is we engaged with a grant writing and consultant group, and they kind of looked at the plan in of itself, all the different funding opportunities that were out there, and created this strategy for us to be able to actually go out and fund the development of this park. And so what we did is we brought back this funding implementation and this funding strategy, brought it back to our rec commission. Again, the same questions were asked. Well, give us your recommendation and what should we do first? And so what we did is we ended up landing on, and I'm sure a lot of us on this call were either involved with or submitted their own ARPA, EDA, travel tourism, outdoor recreation grant. Well, we were no different. So I came back to Holly and I said, hey, we need some help getting this plan up to 35%, the preliminary engineering reports, and let's see if we can't get this thing funded. And at that point, we had, again, the strategy was, first and foremost, we need to be able to create this access. We need to be able to let all community members be able to get into the property. And then what else should we, what else should we put on there? And it was quite interesting because initially our thought was to keep the price or the ask fairly low. And that would in turn not include some of the biking trails or some of the, some additional amenities. And through our conversations with our EDA rep and, looking at the plan as an entirety and what would be the economic impact of the city of Valdez, we decided to really expand that. So in our submission for that EDA grant, we do have both biking trails. And sorry, I'm jumping around, but we got 2 biking trails. We did the yellow that's there is the entry plan that was included. The green trail that is right above the yellow one. That's our, that trail was universally accessible. We put that one in. We have a bog view trail. And so we included about a half a dozen different trails and amenities in our final submission. So like anybody else that's submitted, and we haven't heard anything yet, but we're encouraged that we were able to take this master plan that took over a year to develop, and then another 6 months to go through the funding strategies, and then to actually submit. Was pretty exciting. So the last piece that I'll leave us with before we turn over to questions is there was a pot of money that was made available to the city of Valdez for the initial enhancement and development of the land. And so what we're doing now is we just had an RFQ that went out this past Friday, and that is for the design of so to take the 35% design on all those trails that we just saw all the way up to 100% or 95% design. So we're really excited. The end product of this is, even if we don't get the EDA funding, we're going to have a series of documents that all of these trails will be up to that 95% design. So we can just go out there and start to fund either individual trails or, as the entire plan as when one fell swoop, but we're really excited about it. And it's, it truly, the plan like this and to get as much positive community buy-in just wasn't possible without really listening to people and meeting them at their place. And that all came together to create that plan. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to questions and
Great.
end of our presentation.
Awesome. Well, we'll go, I'm going to take my advantage as the moderator to ask the first one, but if I were, oh, there you go, Evos. Anyway, if I were in Kodiak, Homer, Seward, Sitka, Wrangell, Ketchikan, I'd be thinking like, whoa, how did Valdez do this? And how can we do it? So if you could talk about maybe the funding, if it's from the Evos Trustee Council, but how you put this dream team together, and then just like how would another community emulate this success?
Sure. No, we were very fortunate in the fact that the property was made available through the Evos funding, and so Evos bought it from Port Valdez Company and then gifted it to the city of Valdez. So that in and of itself is very unique. But as far as putting together kind of the dream team and really looking at these plans, I think for me, the thing that I realized very early on, and this was, we started these conversations in, like 2018, and then we didn't acquire until 2019, and we didn't get the team together until 2020. And so, the years, several years coming to get it together. But one of the things that Dr. Holland had mentioned very early on was, what is the purpose of Meals Hill? What is what does it mean to people? And that was something I guess for me was really powerful, because it really drives a lot of what what are we actually going to do with it? What does it mean to you, right? Does it mean this spot that nobody really even cares about, and we can just, I don't know, clear cut it and put it in a ball field or something, right? I mean, obviously I'm being, very on one side, very facetious on that, but really, what does it mean? What's that special? What's so special about it? And so I would encourage anybody to really drill down on just the uniqueness of whatever park or property that you have, and to get the community to tell you, what is special, what is meaningful about it. And then you just have to take that, and you have a all-star team with Gabe and Christine that are able to kind of take that vision, and Holly and her team to facilitate it all. And then you get the end product that we put together.
And Dr. Holland, over to you. Is this pretty emblematic of other projects you've worked on? Have you worked on other ones like this in Alaska or other places, or is it usually more urban, more rural? Is this kind of similar to other projects you've worked on?
It's very similar. Yeah. A lot of characteristics are shared. And, I think one of the exciting things about being on a great team and being able to come on early on in this project is that we didn't feel rushed in that public engagement phase. Again, I was trying to be respectful of everyone's time today and sharing some of that story. But to answer your question, and additionally one I see in the chat that's about, I believe it's Larissa said, can you elaborate a little bit more about how ideas were drawn from the non-vocal majority? I do think that's an exciting part of the story that maybe we could touch on a little bit more, that we were extremely intentional about not only collecting information from diverse groups, but then analyzing it in diverse groups. So not just taking the information as a whole and reviewing it, but rather putting it in smaller sections or sectors and reviewing. An example might be, for instance, what do specific recreational users, what are elements of park development that their preferences and requirements for them in relation to others? Another example would be years of residency, so the degree of how rooted an individual was in the community. Another one would be geographical distance from the park, and what means would people be accessing the environment once it was made publicly available. Another example was that we not only looked at desires for recreation, but what was the current participation in each recreational activity that could be used for development, as well as what potentials for growth were there, so that we understood the city of Valdez current market, the individuals that are currently serving in their other entities, as well as potentials for growth that might lead to population changes. It might also lead to increased tourism in the area, et cetera. And so we were extremely intentional both in development of public engagement instruments, interpretation, and then also the use for making sure we were capturing very diverse groups and voices.
Great, thanks. How about over to you, Nick, to talk a little bit more about the undeveloped portion and how, I remember Gabe and Christine talking about that, but how, if there wasn't a percentage, how did you identify that?
I'll kick that to Gabe and Christine, but I just want to just kick on one more thing about what Hunter said in this, and Larissa's comment about, not not letting that vocal majority kind of dominate the conversation. I think part of that is, we often find that some of those, so that the non-vocal majority, maybe they're not filling out the survey, or maybe they're not the ones that are coming to your open houses. So how do we meet them where they're at? And I think that was one of the things that Dr. Holland's team did really well, was trying to meet them where they're at. And it is, I'll say, Larissa, it's not easy, right? As any of us know that have worked in this sector, it's really it's a challenge, and you have to be intentional. You just have to continue to work it, because you do get that vocal minority oftentimes that truly drive the bus. Gabe, Christine, do you guys want to talk a little bit about just how you, as you were, and I think you described it it was like a bowl of spaghetti, like all the different routes that you walked all over the place. I mean, you couldn't even tell where one line started and ended, but you spent so much time walking that area. How did you determine, where some of those wildlife areas needed to be? Because we didn't have there wasn't a dictate or a mandate on saying you have to have X number of acres that were undeveloped.
Yeah, there were a few different factors that went into that. One was that Holly and Huddle were pretty thorough about making sure to really get as much involvement from the community, people who knew kind of what some of the wildlife movement patterns. We talked, we had the bear working group involved on one of our Zoom calls, and we checked back in with them a few different times, and they had a pretty decent sense of kind of the seasonal wildlife movement patterns in through there. Also, just when we were walking around, we always try to visit a site in as many different seasons as we could. So we saw it a bit in spring and early summer. We saw it in kind of later summer and fall. So a lot of times after salmon season, it's pretty obvious where the at least the large carnivores are walking. So some of that kind of just once we had a better sense of the ground itself and could kind of map out some of those things. We also were just trying to be really cognizant of, just from a conservation standpoint, not fragmenting that habitat, allowing enough breathing room to let the wildlife populations kind of do their thing. We did have a couple one or two identified bald eagle nests that were a protected species. And so then we could work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Alaska Department of Fish and Game to determine what the appropriate buffer zones that they required for development around those types of endangered or protected species. And so some of it just became the way we just work with any control point, is saying, okay, if we know there's a wildlife migration pattern through here, how much space do we kind of need to provide? And some of it was terrain based, just saying, well, the places that we see the animals moving through might be good berry picking areas, but they wouldn't be great mountain biking areas just based on the topsoil or the aspect or something like that. And so we can kind of identify well, we don't want our fast moving traffic in close proximity to fast moving like a mountain bike in close proximity to the browsing brown bears or something like that.
And I think, just to add to what Gabe's saying, that's one really important thing to think about with projects going forward, is that the natural uses of the site by the non-human world is not necessarily incompatible with development for the humans as well, because a big piece of what this plan wanted from the community was open spaces where we didn't feel crowded, view sheds that didn't feel overly developed, the ability to experience solitude, the ability to keep potentially conflicting users away from each other. So all of that actually dovetailed really well with providing protecting large spaces that were not encroached upon for other reasons. And I just think that's a good reminder that it's easy to see human needs and wildlife or plant needs as incompatible, and that's something we have to mitigate. But on this site, we really found them to work in conjunction pretty seamlessly, one to support what the other one got out of it.
Great, thanks. While I ask Nick a question, will you three please share your company's websites in the chat so people can look at your websites and see more information about the other projects that you're working on at Parks and People, at Huddle, and Interior Trails. And then Nick, I was using my old man vision to try to add up all the little numbers about how many miles of trails there are. It seemed like maybe like 4 or 5, but can you give us a general, like with your EDA grant, or maybe it's going to come in pieces, but what is the overall cost for the biggest, obviously that might get scaled down, but what's the cost estimate right now?
Yeah, so we submitted to EDA about 2.5 million, and with a 600,000 match, rough numbers is like 660 match. But right now, the total cost for the entry plan, that would include a vault toilet, a shelter house, the 2 single track bike trails, and multiple hiking trails, would be about 3.1 million. So the entire plan, including the boardwalk, the cliffside boardwalk, was, and Holly, you'll probably smack my hand that I'm not gonna spend this off exactly, but it was like 6 million some change, I believe.
Okay.
So we're kind of taking it into steps, and Michael had asked, I know we're right at our time, but whether or not the conservation easement restrictions raise any particular issues, required workarounds. I think knowing the conservation easement intimately when we first started really helped us make that plan. And we kept the BLM as well as Great Land Trust. They were part of our team. So we had a Meals Hill steering committee that was composed of some local stakeholders and community members, along with Great Land Trust. And so we're very transparent as we're developing this plan to make sure that we weren't going to get to the end and have some super cool element to it that didn't fit with the conservation easement. So was very intentional about that. But thank you all so much for your questions. And
yes,
that was great.
I want to give a big thanks to all our presenters. It is 1 o'clock Alaska time. I'm happy to keep this Zoom open if any of the presenters are willing to stay and keep the dialogue going. But we've got lots of great stuff at the conference tomorrow and the next day. So please stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes if you can, but we value your time. So if you need to take off, please do. But we hope to see you at sessions tomorrow and Friday. But thanks to Dr. Holland, Gabe and Christine, Holly and Nick for presenting about this wonderful project, and fingers crossed for that EDA grant, Nick.
Thank
So
you.
I'll wave goodbye to whoever would like to leave. And if anybody has more questions, especially about maybe what to do when they go to Valdez this time of year. My coworker was just down there for a big ski weekend. So, oh, nice. Dr. Holland, you got some office assistants there, huh? Holly, is this similar to any other projects that you've worked on recently?
Yes, and no. So I guess maybe I'll point. There's one question we didn't get to in the chat, and it's from a Girdwood community member. And it's Kaylee. Are you still on? Is she still on? Let's see. Okay, so what I want to dig into a little bit is Kaylee asked in the chat, did the stakeholders create the first draft of the plan? How did you engage diverse user group input and bring the vision together? So I think Kaylee is working through a trails plan in Girdwood right now. And I think finding consensus has been a little bit more challenging. And so I think that there's just a lot to learn from how you initiate a project. So there's different levels of funding, right? There's always different levels of funding available, and you basically can do what you can with the funding you have available. But also, like what I was talking about, you heard it from all of us at the very initiation of the project, how you put your project together at the beginning and how you think through, how you gather the data early and gather community opinion and perceptions early is really important. You've heard that. So the answer to your question directly, Kaylee, is stakeholders did not create the first draft of the plan. That's why the city of Valdez hired professional outdoor recreation professionals, right? So we critically put together that stakeholder outreach and data collection phase so that then professionals go away and put together the first draft of the plan. And then we go back to the public and see what they think about that. And then once we get more and more input on that, then, the project team and the project owner then make decisions about how to move forward. So knowing what's happening intimately with the Girdwood Trails plan, I think that we can maybe have, there's just a lot to learn about how you adequately fund a project and how you really think through how you put together the initial data collection and stakeholder outreach and engagement in order to ensure that you've really laid the groundwork for the whole plan. So that I just wanted to answer Kaylee's question. So to answer your question, Steve, it's like Girdwood, but it's also not like Girdwood. But that's how Alaska is, right?
Yeah. Do people in Girdwood, or I guess anywhere this could happen, where they feel like maybe the first public meeting that they hear about or come to, 85% of the decisions have already been made, and so they kind of throw their hands up? But I appreciate Dr. Holland saying you didn't have to rush. There was a long period of true back and forth, I guess. And so, not knowing the situation as well in Girdwood as you do, Holly, it seems like that could be it. But then I guess maybe that's a question for all of you is, as I look at the lines on the map, what happens, and I'm sure you dealt with this lots, what happens when those uses collide? Maybe somebody wants a natural area and somebody wants groomed trails. Maybe somebody wants universal access, but not another, and no bikes on that trail, or vice versa. Is there a way to, how do you get that consensus?
I wanted to chime in about that really quickly, if I can. That I think one of the things that was so critical from our perspective about having Dr. Holland involved in this process was because it was the information he was collecting was it broke things down really clearly into percentages, and it was data you could analyze as opposed to the more anecdotal things like community meetings that where you have a really vocal minority or a really vocal one or two people, that are very passionate about one particular outcome. But we were able to say, based on the information that Hunter was providing, 59% of people would like this, and 72% of people would like this. And those design directives were, that's what we were basing the designs on. And so when we brought it back to the community, when there was resistance to some elements of the design, it was really, it was great to be able to say, well, actually what we heard from the entire community was this. And so it was a way to answer some of the dissatisfied people who weren't getting what they were preferring. But it was like, well, actually, this is a community plan, and it's for everyone. And what everyone said was this.
And this dovetails really obviously to me with one of the principles. We talk a lot about what sustainable trails mean, and we end up speaking more about, planning and design and how we build them. But one of the final points that we use is, does the trail meet the needs of the intended users? And we see all the time that when a trail doesn't meet those needs, you get social trails, you get disruptive traffic, you get basically the screw you mentality, which it becomes embedded instead of deterred. And so in this case, we came into the process early enough that we could see what are the needs of the intended users. Whereas as far as how this differs or dovetails with projects we've been on, we've been invited as trails people into projects at every stage, including at the very end when someone else already did it wrong and we have to try to fix it and get ahead of the public relations nightmare. So literally, this is at the far other end of that spectrum. And I really would say for future community or for communities with future planning, do not underestimate how much buy-in you can get from the overall community at the end of things, even when their needs are not exactly met. If they feel as if they have been asked and then answered along the way, it's night and day compared to more contentious projects we've been involved where that step was either missed or rushed or not broadcasted widely enough to really bring in everyone who might have some say. And Hunter's involvement in that was really critical. And Valdez is in prioritizing that part of the project.
So Steve, the other thing I want to dig into, I've been thinking about this, is user conflict, right? I think no matter what, if we all do the best, if we all are 100% successful in our jobs, there's still going to be user conflict, like in the future. It's always going to happen. And I think that you need to do what Christine just said is, listen, act, make sure everyone is engaged. But, coming from somebody who used to be in the land, the outdoor recreation management end of it too, as a land manager, I think that if you set up a scenario where your outdoor recreation assets are well managed, like there's an actual plan for long-term management and maintenance, and that you actually fund that plan with both funding and resources like people to manage them, right? Then you're going to have an easier job dealing with conflict down the road. It's not going to never come up. You're always going to have to deal with it somehow. But as long as your system for trail management is there, you're going to have an easier time.
Thanks. Yeah, Hunter, do you want to talk a little bit just about Gabe's point about that data, helping consensus, helping kind of direct at the beginning stages, and how that can, well, not like Holly said, not pleasing everybody, at least engage everybody in a plan that the community would support, whether or not it meets their 100% of their individual needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. My response is actually pretty short and simple, that I think with the team, we were very good that when a difficult conversation needed to be brought up, we were well prepared with information to defend our decisions, right? And so when we went to the community with an idea that we thought we interpreted from the information, we brought the information to the conversation. We're very open-minded and adaptable, and it was always a two-way conversation, but we never came unprepared without having resources to defend that decision.
I would add to that, Hunter, I think one thing you did very well and the team kind of got from you is that by having the data to refer to, we could also undefensively say, interesting, it sounds as if our data missed capturing something that we're hearing coming up now. How can we revisit or tweak or whatever one of our tools, as opposed to being like, oh, no, that's not what you said, or that's not what we heard, or this is what we should do. We could always kick it back to the data and be like, all right, well, if that's what we're hearing now, doesn't quite match up this, let's refigure. And that was really helpful to kind of diffuse the emotion with some verifiable numbers.
Great. Well, I'm gonna, unless anybody has any final points, any of our presenters, I know Nick had to go, but we just really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise today. I will remind everybody that a PDF of that presentation will be on our website, and we recorded this presentation as well. And so hoping to hear good news about the EDA grant from Valdez eventually. And just another plug for the conference tomorrow afternoon. Shirley Kelly of the Economic Development Administration for Alaska will be presenting on further opportunities through that grant, as well as Niels Andreessen of the Alaska Municipal League, and others talking about funding for great projects like this. So anyway, lots of great stuff to come with the Trails Conference, but thank you all again. We really appreciate it. And thanks those who attended, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.